Future Warrior, Earth's Children. Chapter 12. Stalker stood in the corner of the cavernous hangar bay. When he had entered it, the space had been clean, sterile, and partially filled with orderly rows of prefabricated buildings. Many of the structures, designed for surface deployments, had been filled with rows of beds. Others were filled with trauma carts or surgical stations, as well other all manner of neatly organized specialist equipment. Amongst the scene had calmly moved the ship's surgeon and medical staff, soft words barely carrying across the space as they checked equipment and ran inventories. The scene that Stalker now watched was very different. Pandemonium did not do it justice. Everywhere, people rushed. Raised voices yelled requests for assistance, orders, or just to be heard, and everywhere blood and bodily fluids now stained the previously pristine deck. The first transport of casualty evacuations from the surface had arrived in several hours before. They had not stopped coming since. The fleet's dedicated hospital ships had taken the initial surge of wounded, then they had sent less urgent cases to other ships, and then finally transports went wherever had capacity to take them, no matter the severity. This had been foreseen, and many of the UEF's transport and warships had been prepared to take overflow cases. However, the number of wounded seemed to be without limit. The fleet's medical capacity was stretched to breaking point, and still they came. Apparently, it was worse in the field hospital on the surface. Stalker did not doubt it. Amongst the overwhelmed ship's medical complement, Stalker could also see members of the Second Terra Nova. As the casualties had begun to arrive, the Terra Nova combat medics present on the ship had arrived as if called by an unseen signal. With the Second Terra Nova's combat medics had come the regiment's 10 company surgical officers and the regimental medical staff and chief surgical officer. They had seamlessly integrated themselves into the desperate efforts, performing triage, life-saving procedures, and relieving exhausted ship's medical staff to allow them a few minutes to rest, recover, and prepare for the next rush. Other members of the Terra Nova had also come, as had ship's crew, assisting with basic first aid, cleaning, providing refreshments to the medical responders, and when necessary, moving the dead. The efforts of the medical responders had been tireless, their energy seeming to only increase with each new rush of wounded men and women. Stalker himself had stepped aside a short time ago. The level of untrained help was sufficient, and more members of the Terra Nova arrived every minute to add their support to the effort. It was chaos, but organized chaos. The ship's surgeon and the Second Terra Nova's chief surgical officer jointly waged a war against the disorder, like generals presiding over a bloody battlefield. Stalker felt himself sinking into cold detachment as he watched, his subconscious doing its best to shield him from the horror before him. A lone point of stillness amongst the hurrying medical teams, Stalker watched as a UEA soldier wearing armored cavalry corporal's patches coughed noisily from his nearby bed, the man nearly choking on blood and bile as a nurse in a stained medical tunic rolled him on his side. Stalker knew that just out of sight the bodies of the fallen were being stacked 3 and 4 high in the ship's corridors. It was clear to Stalker that if the Daimos were effective in offensive operations, they were also clearly masters at defensive warfare. This was brutal bloodshed, pure and simple. The Daimos were heavily entrenched in good positions that utilized the terrain, and they would not be easily moved. They seemed determined to weather whatever fire the supporting UEF and UEF elements could throw at them, and force the UEA to have to come and dig them out one bloody meter at a time. It was a blunt strategy, but it was working. The best units the UEA could throw at them were making little headway, and were taking horrendous losses. The ground war was intense, and months of fighting was expected before the system could be considered secured. Stalker frowned. This was only the beginning. The UEDF was still seeking a war of rapid reconquest and was throwing lives away in an attempt to maintain operational momentum. Seeing the horrific toll it was taking on the UEA, a toll that was already overwhelming the fleet's carefully prepared medical resources, it was clear to Stalker that the strategy was ultimately unsustainable. This was especially true on the large world of Lupus Prime. The planet was large, had several small land masses, but was dominated by a single continent. The surface was mountainous and covered in endless pine forests due to the terraforming processes. The planet also possessed vast, deep oceans of salty, mineral-rich water and numerous scattered island archipelagos. In short, this was a defender's paradise and an attacker's nightmare, and the Deimos had used the time since they had taken the system well to dig in deep with good concealment across the planet in numbers that were still uncertain, but appeared to be considerable, perhaps representing the bulk of the Deimos's available surviving land forces. Something had to give. At this rate, the UEA's offensive power would be worn away long before the Deimos were fully defeated across the considerable territory and systems they still held. Stalker, like the rest of the Terra Nova, had been relegated to spectators and were unlikely to play any role in the campaign. Behind his black skull visage, Stalker's frown deepened, and he turned and walked from the hangar, leaving red footsteps in his wake on the metal deck. General Jacob de Veers kept his face studiously impassive, showing no sign of emotion as the tumultuous meeting continued. The first reports of the heavy losses from the ongoing campaign in the Wolf 424 system had come into Stratcom and had kept coming ever since. Carrying out the highest level of strategic planning for the UEDF, Stratcom was a sprawling command and control organization, and its highest committee was chaired by the service chiefs of the branches that made up the UEDF, including the United Earth Fleet, United Earth Marine Corps, United Earth Army, United Earth Special Operations Command, and Mecha Command. Other seats were held by various senior officers in charge of supporting elements, such as logistics, capability procurement, infrastructure, research and development, and of course, intelligence. Without moving his head, de Veers glanced sideways and noted another figure standing silently near the entrance to the conference room, a Crusaders battle commander in pristine dark blue extreme environment armor. The Crusader was a rare sight since the bulk of the division had disappeared along with the 8th Fleet in the WX Ursi Majori system during the initial Deimos incursion. De Veers knew that the division was slowly being rebuilt, a process that would take years. The Crusaders' presence at the meeting was not unexpected. The 10 retained a right to be informed of and to observe any senior military or political meeting, a right enshrined in the UEL Charter. De Veers knew that the 10 took the right seriously, almost as a religious duty. Intelligence reports detailed attempts in the past to bypass the 10's observer. None of the attempts had ended well. A former commander of the UEA had arranged a high-level strategy meeting arranged purposefully to exclude the 10 that had resulted in his dismissal from the UEDF within 24 hours. The reports did not detail what pressure had been applied, but it had been sudden and decisive. Another older report detailed an incident where a 10's representative had been denied entry to a meeting called by the then UEL chairman. Within minutes of the meeting beginning, a company from the Barbarians Assault Division had landed in assault transports and made their way to the meeting room, leaving a trail of injured security personnel in their wake. The 10's representative was admitted before the Barbarians could use shaped charges to blow the room's door. The report also detailed that a full Barbarians regiment had mobilized, and that movement had been detected in several other assault division-based locations during the event. The message had been clear: the 10 would enforce the UEL Charter and would brook no opposition to their rights. A subsequent review fully exonerated the Barbarian Division's actions and condemned the chairman's actions as both illegal and dangerous. Since that time, no one in the political office had ever again sought to challenge the 10's legal rights under the UEL Charter. Behind his visor, the Crusader's expression was unreadable, and idly de Veers wondered what the assault trooper must be thinking as he watched proceedings silently. After fierce debate, the meeting reached an uneasy consensus. Stratcom would adjust the current campaign strategy. It was clear that the hoped-for pace of operations was no longer sustainable. The UEDF's offensive operation had culminated, and rapid progress could no longer be made at an acceptable cost. The Deimos had forced the UEDF advance to slow and eventually halt. The choice had been stark: lives or time, and the choice had been made to conserve lives. The UEDF would slow its advance, allowing more time to plan and execute operations to retake planetary bodies and to wear down Deimos defending forces with supporting fires before moving to close with and destroy them in close combat. This would also reduce strain on the UEDF's already overstretched logistic supply chains, but it would also reduce pressure on the Deimos and allow them even more time to dig in and strengthen their hold over the systems they still held. It was a trade-off, but in De Veer's estimation, a necessary one. The meeting had also recommended that all the assault divisions be withdrawn from combat operations so they could be rested and refitted as part of the temporary slowing of operations. A recommendation that the 10's blue armored representative made no objection to, the Crusader remaining silent, an action that was taken to be assent. The 10 had been active across multiple systems, including the Vikings at Ross 128, the Barbarians at Wolf 359, the Terra Nova and Philistines at Kruger 60A and B, and the Raptors and Praetorians at Proxima Centauri. The remaining complete divisions, the Excalibur, Immortals, and Rangers divisions had formed a deep strategic reserve and had remained present on Earth along with the remnants of the Crusaders. The war would grind on, but at a slower pace and at a lower cost in lives and material. As he left the room, De Veers thought he could detect a new stiffness in the Crusaders' battle commander. The decision also meant that the timetable to retake the WX Ursi Majori system would also be pushed back several months, meaning that any chance of finding the fate of the Lost Division and the 8th Fleet would further dwindle. Alvaro Valdez knelt and said a silent prayer, his gloved hand touching the icy ground, the shapes of the 2 small graves still visible as discernible lumps in the snow. As he rose, his hands closed into fists, anger and grief settling into his heart, even as his tears began to freeze on his cheeks. Rest now, little ones. Heaven is warm, the grass is green and soft. Your parents will come soon to tuck you into bed. Alvaro felt as if his heart was breaking, as if the sheer weight of grief was dragging him down into a bottomless abyss. Even as his legs gave out from under him, he felt hands reach out to hold him upright. He could only see the shapes of the blue armor soldiers to his sides through his tears, their words calm and quiet. To grieve for those we love is no weakness, for blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted, brother. Alvaro nodded, struggling to speak. I know for everything there is a season, and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die. But how can this be their time? How, brothers? I cannot feel his hand in this. The hands around him hugged him tighter. Faith is a test. We believe you will pass through this trial as you have helped so many others do, for he both heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds, and teaches us to seek justice and correct oppression, and there remains much justice to deliver. Alvaro steadied on his feet and stood, the hands gently releasing him. He looked upwards into Laurasia's gray, swirling sky, and praying softly locked the grief away. He would release it when the time was right, when there were not people who needed him, when every alien invader on Laurasia was dead. The ship's metallic composite deck creaked, the slight sound picked up and enhanced by the EEA helmet's situational awareness sensors. The HSDS was maneuvering, the large bulky transport ship moving to join with the others in the convoy. Consisting of almost 20 ships, much of the convoy consisted of hospital ships, while others were empty cargo vessels on their return run, earthward bound. Stalker found himself on the viewing deck of the HSDS. Several other Terra Nova, Marine, and naval personnel likewise, standing in small grounds gazing into the void. Stalker, for his part, stood alone. As the ships slowly swung about, Stalker could see the massive, but distant, gas giant Carnivora, with its accompanying moon Kennedy. A number of specks around Kennedy showing the presence of UEF warships. Closer, the forbidding green and crimson mass of Lupus Prime loomed. At this distance, the planet looked tranquil, the green of its forests and the red of its algae-laden, mineral-rich oceans making it almost beautiful. However, in its orbit a mass of UEF warships and transports hovered, and numerous small craft of every type could be seen patrolling or moving to or from the surface. Within Lupus Prime's valleys, mountains and forests' bloody battle continued seemingly without end. But an end had come for the Terra Nova. The division was being withdrawn from the theater. While not unexpected since the hard-fought campaign on Sci-Fi and the raiding missions that had followed, both of which had cost the Terra Nova dearly, it still felt wrong to be leaving the system with so much fighting ongoing. But leaving they were. Out beyond the planets, Wolf 424b pulsed, seeming to emit a baleful light, as if the star itself resented the presence of the fleet of ships loitering in its domain. Stalker breathed in the cold, purified air of the HSDS. He would not miss the Wolf 424 system. Commodore Sandra Jansen stood stiffly on the deck of the UES Damascus, her hands held tightly behind her back. Through her 3D spatial interface, 3DSI, helmet system, she could see the convoy forming up on schedule. The destroyers Java and Thracian taking up positions in the lead and rear, while the Damascus maneuvered along one of the convoy's flanks. The escort force was small, some might say economical, but it was all Fleet Command had deemed necessary. She could not really disagree. The Deimos naval forces had been decimated in recent months, and with the convoy being earthward bound in a friendly territory, a heavier assignment of warships would be an extravagance. Still, in her assessment, it also showed a degree of underestimation of remaining Deimos forces, or in their ability to be tactically agile. And underestimating an enemy, even a weakened one, was cavalier and unnecessary. There were a lot of troop ships in the convoy, as well as large numbers of vulnerable hospital and medical ships. To have them too lightly protected grated on her. She turned her head as a nearby navigations officer informed her that both the convoy and escorts had reported ready for jump, and that the navigational plot was set for their first jump. The trip back to Earth would be a long one, a lot of space to transit, and a lot of space where an enemy force could lurk. Sandra Jansen growled inwardly before speaking. "All right, let's get this movable feast underway. Jump at your discretion." Stalker walked down the ramp of the HSDS at Eureka, heavy kit bag in one hand, the SBR 103 in the other, the familiar smell of dust and the sea filling his lungs. The trip had been long and thankfully uneventful. Stalker had passed the time, along with many, inventorying, cleaning, and servicing equipment. Time had also been spent in training simulations and hooking up to the mill net to access the latest available intelligence reports. Not all the Terra Nova, it seemed, were destined to return home to Eureka. Some of the troop ships had split off once they had entered the Sol system, destined for other UEDF training or garrison locations. The decision apparently having been made to keep the division dispersed rather than concentrated at Eureka. Stalker, for his part, wanted nothing more than to get out of his armor and see Zoe. However, as he reached the foot of the ramp, he saw Link talking to a Terra Nova unit commander. Link abruptly spun on his heels and began walking towards Stalker, intent clear in every stride. Clearly something was afoot. Despite the creeping weariness in his heart, Stalker quickened his pace to meet him. "What's the story, Link? You won't believe this shit, boss. You have been relieved of command." For a moment, Stalker was too stunned to respond. Then for an instant, he felt fury rise before he crushed it with effort. Stalker took a slow breath. "Understood, Link. Any additional information?" "Just that Lee will act as officer commanding the 21st in your absence, as apparently. I am also relieved effective immediately. We are both to report to the assault commander of the 8th Regiment." Stalker raised an eyebrow. The 8th Terra Nova was the home of some of the most specialized units in the entire Terra Nova, including the division's elite reconnaissance, scout sniper, and Strider companies. The regiment served as the eyes and ears of the division, as well as one of its keenest blades. Stalker did not know the 8th Regiment's assault commander personally, but he knew her by reputation. She was considered one of the most lethal Terra Nova living, her skills legendary. She had come up through the ranks on a mixture of pure talent, determination, and ruthlessness. "Well," said Stalker evenly, Let's go find out what all the fuss is about. Stalker and Link caught an LTT flight out to the 8th Regiment's current base of operations, a training establishment located in the mountains near La Paz in Peru, 350 kilometers northeast of Arica. Upon arrival, they were directed to a spacious hangar, where around 30 Terra Nova assault troopers of various ranks waited, none apparently the wiser as to what had drawn them all together. They had been chatting for about 15 minutes when a low hum was heard in the distance. Stalker recognized it immediately, the sound of an ion drive system running above recommended power levels. The Strider, when it appeared, moved in a way Stalker had never seen, and his breath caught in his throat, the hangar falling silent as all heads turned towards the sound. The Strider was skimming along on its ion thrusters like an ice skater, the body moving fluidly despite its bulk, its ion thrusters giving a bright white glow as they surged at full power. As it closed with the hangar, it slid out of sight behind a building, the machine just a blur of black. Then it sprang over an adjacent hangar in one clean leap, coming down with the grace of a leaping cat in a cloud of dust before sliding sideways to a halt only meters before the gaping crowd. No one had reacted to the Strider's movements. It had been too fast. Only Link Stalker, noted, still stood casually, apparently unruffled by the sight, clear nonchalance showing in his easy stance. As the dust settled, the only noise was the crackle of metal coming from the Strider's cooling ion thrusters. With a hiss, the Strider's pilot cradle cracked open, swinging upwards. From within, a light alloy frame lowered, the pilot stepping lightly off it onto the dusty plascrete hangar entrance, a helmet held lightly in one hand. As one, the group stood straighter, a clear sign of both respect and rank. Sunray 8, commanding officer of the 8th Terra Nova, was a woman of small stature and slim build, raven hair, and the cold professional countenance of a veteran warrior. She wore a black full-body suit fitted with light protective ballistic armor, and Stalker guessed her age as being in the mid-30s. She was a striking figure, and Stalker could feel as much as see her penetrating gaze when it swept over the gathering. On her body, suit and name tag said Raven. Her voice, when it came, was surprisingly melodic, with the brittle edge of someone that always spoke directly and to the point. You are all here because you come highly recommended by your respective regimental commanders. Some of you I know. Raven inclined her head slightly towards Link, who returned the gesture. Others are strangers to both me and the 8th Terra Nova. You are also an experiment, plain and simple, one I agreed to only under suffrage. The fact is, too many of you do not understand how the 8th works and what our Striders, scout snipers, and reconnaissance troopers can do, and how they are best employed to maximum effect against an enemy. As such, you're going to spend some time with us, learn about our tradecraft, and if you survive, use it against the enemy before returning back to your original formations to bring them this hard-won knowledge. Make no mistake, this will happen my way and no other. I do not care what you have done or what you think you know. Here you are all learners, and you will learn and respect what the 8th has to teach, or you can get the fuck out of my command and return back to your own. Are we clear? Link broke the silence first. Yes, ma'am. The others, including Stalker, quickly adding their assent. For a moment, Raven glanced around at the gathered soldiers, seemingly looking for any sign of defiance or reproach. Apparently finding none, she walked directly up to Link and paused by his side. She then called a list of names, before telling them to report to the reconnaissance trooper training barracks. As they left, she called a handful more names, directing them to proceed to the scout sniper training barracks. After they left, only 8 remained, including Stalker and Link. The rest of you are with me. Abruptly, she turned to Link. Lincoln, it is good to see you here. Link nodded. Thank you, ma'am. It is a pleasure to be back with the 8th. I have a special request for you, Lincoln. You were one of my best. Our scout snipers have been hit hard. The training school is struggling for instructors, and none of the latest batch of recruits can shoot for shit. Can you fix that, please? Link straightened in what for him passed as a salute. Yes, ma'am. It's as good as done. Without a word, Link turned and left, purpose showing in every movement as he moved off towards the scout sniper barracks. Raven turned and eyed the remaining 7 Terra Nova troopers, before gesturing towards the Strider she had arrived in. Do any of you know what that is? After a moment of silence, someone replied, "It's a Strider, ma'am." Raven raised an eyebrow. That, she pointed, is death incarnate. It is the most lethal that all of the combined technology of the known galaxy can make an individual assault trooper. Here we do not call them Striders. They are Inca, individual neurological connectivity armor. They are powered armor, battle suits, extensions of your body. They will make you better than you knew you could be, and will push your senses beyond limits you did not even know existed. And you're going to learn to pilot one. This particular Inca is a new prototype, villain pattern. She incorporates a revised ion drive, increased signature management, and enhanced stealth systems, and a swath of technology improvements based on recent combat experience, including incorporating some subsystems of Deimos origin. She's a knife fighter, fast, merciless, and deadly. She relies on stealth, speed, and the sudden strike to win, not heavy armor or massive firepower. A slight smile crossed Raven's face, and she's my kind of ride. The days, and then weeks, had passed in a blur for Stalker. The time spent initially in various classroom courses, learning about Inca systems, engineering principles, and later progressing to medical testing and use of basic Inca simulators. The learning curve had been steep, the pace breakneck, and in between studying and sleeping there had been calls to Zoe. Now, under the mid-morning sun, Stalker walked out towards the dark form of a Strider for the first time. The machine was a Griffin close combat pattern. It had a lower squatter profile than other types and was heavily armored. Normally, it was equipped with an array of close combat weapons which included a powerful multi-barrel cannon, plasma gun, flamethrower, and shoulder-mounted scatter rockets. However, on this suit, its weapons had been replaced with training aids. Around its support, crews swarmed, checking systems and performing routine maintenance. Stalker felt naked without his EEA, the much lighter and thinner Inca bodysuit feeling very different to wear from what Stalker was used to. Approaching the Strider, Stalker saw his suit's systems come alive through his helmet's heads-up display. HUD, as the suit connected to the waiting Inca. Activating a control, the Strider's pilot cradle opened and the pilot access system lowered. Stepping into it, the alloy frame retracted, lifting him up before settling back into the cockpit, before the cradle lowered and closed around him, sealing Stalker inside. Immediately, the voice of one of the instructors came through the helmet's audio system. "Well, you made it, Stalker. You managed to get in without breaking anything. Let's get you all synced up, preferably without frying your neurons." Stalker grinned. The instructors were an acerbic lot, but their skills and knowledge were undeniable. With a jolt, Stalker felt the Inca's system's hard connect with his suit. This was followed by a brief sense of falling and dislocation, before mentally slamming back into reality. Stalker had the sudden sensation of feeling bigger, of seeing through different eyes, of his body's proportions being different, of being strong. It was surreal and unnerving, but after weeks of simulator use, Stalker was expecting it and breathed calmly while his brain and nervous system adjusted to their new reality. "Looks good, Stalker. Sync is holding steady. She likes you. Let's fire up the tactical overlay. Just remember to keep breathing." After a moment, computer code began to scroll down the edge of his vision. This was followed by his helmet's HUD abruptly shifting to the Strider's sensor and data feeds. This was perhaps the most disorientating part, as with a thought, Stalker could switch display modes, zoom into objects, activate or deactivate sensor or weapon systems. The interface now acted at the speed of thought, changes seeming to happen before thoughts had even fully formed. Stalker found the effect both exhilarating and overwhelming. "Steady there, Stalker. Vitals are spiking. Control your breathing, slow your thoughts, focus on one thing at a time, slowly now." With an effort, Stalker applied the lessons and techniques he had been taught during numerous failures in the simulators, and his mind cleared, the sensation becoming more natural as his mind ceased to push back against the foreign sensations and the feeling of constant whole-of-body tingling that seemed to fade but never completely go away. "Nice. Good work. Now I'm going to release her system controls to you." Just remember, Stalker, this is no longer a simulation. You break something now, it's for real. So in your own time, take her out to the specified coordinates. Easy. With a shudder, Stalker felt the Strider respond to his slightest movements, the machine feeling like a seamless part of his own body. As he tried to straighten fully upright, the Strider took a staggered step backwards, the automatic safety software kicking in and stabilizing the suit before it could topple over, an amber alarm icon flickering in his HUD. Stalker cursed, while through his ears he could hear his instructor's laughter. "I said slow, cowboy. You are still learning to walk before you can run." More confidently, Stalker rose up and began to walk, the movements slowly becoming smoother and more natural. As he moved, Stalker tested his arms and cycled through his systems, the Strider's onboard systems reacting instantly to his neurological commands. With a deep breath and without asking for permission, Stalker engaged the ion thrusters and the world accelerated, the Strider surging forward, unerringly following the path laid out by the navigational computer in the HUD. The sensation was a lot like ice skating, Stalker thought, the power pushing smoothly from the foot-mounted ion thrusters. The heavy Strider feeling light and nimble as it glided forwards over the uneven terrain. As the world surged past, the Inca's onboard sensor suite threw up a constant series of identification and tracking icons, the system picking up distant vehicles, base personnel, and structures, each being cataloged and identified by the Inca's computers, before being assessed and dismissed by Stalker at the speed of thought. The feeling was effortless and exhilarating. The neurological connection made operating the vehicle while being bombarded with sensor data as effortless as breathing. As he was cresting a ridgeline after leaving the base's perimeter, the Inca's onboard electronic warfare suite and threat detection algorithm suddenly spiked into life as a new target was acquired, the suit's system automatically slaving the Strider's primary anti-armor weapon, its plasma gun, onto the threat. Stalker perused the threat data in a heartbeat. There was another Strider ahead in the tree line, half concealed in a gully. The suit's optical system merged feeds from several sensors, including thermal, optical enhancement, and low probability of intercept phased array radar and light detection and ranging, or LiDAR, into a single fused display for the pilot. Stalker could clearly see the target, and with a thought confirmed the plasma gun lock and fired. Ahead, unfazed by the simulated shot from the dummy plasma gun, the half-concealed Strider broke cover and smoothly closed the distance before merging alongside Stalker's machine. "Nice work, Stalker. A bit slow on the uptake, but better than most, but with some practice we will knock 30% off your engagement time." Stalker acknowledged his instructor with a wave, the Strider mirroring his movements. "Now the fun begins. This time I'm hunting you, and you have a 5-minute head start.